Welcome back, everyone, to today's Explainer. Look, as advanced students of interdisciplinary history, you're all highly accustomed to analyzing kinetic conflicts, right? Your standard wars of steel and plasma. But today we're opening the archives to decode something entirely different. We are looking at an empire built in absolute silence. This is the Aringarosa family's absolute masterclass in shadow history and deep time engineering. Let's get right into it. Okay, just glancing at our syllabus for today, we're going to quickly cover the dying world of Xylos, engineering the glacial monuments, Earth as a shadow nursery, Arantia's century of sacrifice, the biosynthetic MAMA protocol, and finally, the non-aligned gravity strategy. So starting right off with Section 1, the dying world of Xylos and its extreme environmental constraints. We really have to start by grasping the absolute nightmare of environmental pressure that forced the Aringarosans to just completely abandon conventional warfare. I mean, imagine the reality Arantia Aringarosa was born into. Xylos was quite literally a dying moon. You've got agricultural domes shattering under Saturn's gravitational shear, soil totally poisoned with ammonia ice. Her people were starving. Now, contrast that horrific baseline with their target destination, Earth. Earth was this oxygen-rich, chaotic, noisy greenhouse. It was culturally fragmented, sure, but that isolation and noise made it the absolute perfect cover for a completely silent operation. And that brings us to this incredible dying directive given by Carolina Aringarosa in 1930s Chicago. She essentially anchored her people's entire survival strategy to a child that hadn't even been born yet, someone known only as the Liberator. She knew, absolutely knew, that to cultivate a lineage of pure intellect, they had to adapt culturally. They needed the protective gravity of Jupiter and the warmth of Earth's sun. Talk about playing the long game, right? Moving right along to Section 2, let's look at the glacial monuments and the impossible physics of the deep ice. When you actually sit down and look at the technical blueprints for this, it is staggering. Seriously, how on earth, actually scratch that, how on Enceladus do you carve a 5-kilometer-tall statue of a boy deep inside an active glacier without triggering massive thermal alarms for the Saturnian Directorate? Well, it took 3 literally impossible steps of macro engineering. First, localized thermal stabilization of the surrounding ice sheet. Then, deploying antimatter catalyzed fusion energy. And finally, weaving a perfectly aligned carbon nanotube skeleton wrapped in a high-density ice matrix. It is just a breathtaking adaptation. But here's the kicker. That monument on Enceladus, it wasn't just some isolated artifact. Deep beneath that ice sat a quantum gravity transceiver. We're talking a 1,000 square foot, 5-pointed metallic star forged from highly ordered iron-nickel alloy. And the crazy part is, we found identical pentagrams buried on literally every solid body in the solar system, from the Coprates Chasma on Mars right down to the bedrock beneath a regular residential basement in Bangalore. It's like this ancient universal highway system, just waiting for the exact right signal to wake it up. All right, Section 3, Earth as a shadow nursery and the economics of catalytic distractions. Now, to successfully hide the breeding of their liberator, the Aringarossans had to weaponize Earth's own chaotic socioeconomic systems. They used our brute force tendencies as their own energy distribution network. Look at this timeline. In 2020, when the Saturnians unleashed a global synthetic virus to hunt down their genetic line, Earth's frantic pandemic response, which tied up Saturnian surveillance scanning trillions of health records, was the ultimate smokescreen. Then, in 2023, the Aringarossans subtly shifted quartz crystal cycles by exactly 6 nanoseconds. To us, it caused a massive, panicked 12-second financial flash crash. But in that tiny blind spot, they quietly funded a suborbital launch platform. And by 2025, global tariff wars were jamming corporate networks perfectly. They literally used our societal noise to mask their signal. Okay, on to Section 4, Arantia's century of sacrifice. This is the true emotional anchor of this entire deep time strategy. It's so easy to get lost in the data and the engineering, but history is carried on the shoulders of individuals. Try to look at this massive timeline through Arantia's eyes. Imagine being this physically fragile woman, sacrificing 90 years of your life just to protect an invisible legacy on a freezing, toxic world. From Carolina's directive in the 1930s, Arantia endured the failing domes of Xylos in utter silence. She waited decades just to receive a single, tiny, encrypted deep space packet in 2013, confirming a birth millions of kilometers away. And then she held on until 2025 to activate the final phase at age 95. Her whole existence stretches across this timeline as just one quiet, eventless vigil. But man, did that silence pay off. The Liberator's genetic stability upon his birth in 2013 was a staggering 99.9%. This kid, Skandabhat, born right in the middle of all that bustling noise in Bangalore, was living proof that their selective breeding program under Jupiter's indirect gravity and Earth's sun was an absolute undeniable success. Which brings us to Section 5, the biosynthetic mammo protocol and terraforming an ammonia wasteland. So, jumping to 2025, how exactly did Aransha prepare the frozen grave of Xylos for an oxygen-breathing Earthling? She activated 6 hyper-sophisticated biosynthetic humanoid platforms. And these weren't just simple machines. They were localized biosynthetic terraformers. They had exactly 10 years to chemically break down the moon's ambient ammonia into nitrogen and hydrogen. You had Sensu running tactical optimization, Daihatsu handling the agricultural domes and microfiltration, Shimanatsu on kinetic shielding, Hiroshima tweaking the gravity generators, and Miyazaki building the structural architecture. And my personal favorite detail? Ashwani was synthesizing the actual atmospheric conversion matrix, adding specific aromatic compounds so the air would literally smell like Skanda's mother's kitchen back in Bangalore. Just brilliant. Finally, Section 6, the non-aligned gravity strategy, the absolute climax of their silent sovereignty. Skanda, who was only 12 years old at the time he masterminded this, mind you, had this brilliant philosophy. He noted, the country that has to use violence is the country that has already lost the argument. He completely understood that kinetic warfare is fundamentally incompetent and way too expensive. True sovereignty isn't about being the strongest, it's about being the third body. You don't fight a gas giant with brute force. You leverage the forces of your oppressors against them. You just need to be in the exact right place at the right time. And their escape plan proved it. It all hinged on this concept of metric inversion, basically decoupling the local space-time fabric from a primary gravitational field to create an isolated sovereign bubble. So they send a targeted radar pulse to that Bangalore transceiver, triggering a closed quantum loop. And the localized effect on Earth? 500,000 protesters in Guanghaman Square physically floated into the air. This massive cultural and physical anomaly completely blinded Earth's sensors, letting Skanda just walk right through the door they created. But, getting to Xylos is one thing. Protecting it is a whole different beast. Instead of relying on Jupiter for a shield or building massive defensive weapons, Skanda did something wild. He positioned Xylos perfectly in a mathematically unstable saddle point equilibrium between the two gas giants. Because Jupiter is exactly 3.3 times more massive than Saturn, setting up at that precise distance ratio creates this perfect dynamic gravitational null zone. Of course, a saddle point is naturally unstable, right? So how do you stay there? They deployed these massive electrodynamic tethers from the moon's poles to harvest ambient plasma currents straight out of the Jovian magnetosphere. They actively generated continuous electromagnetic drag against the planetary magnetic fields to constantly nudge the moon back into perfect equilibrium. So picture this. When the massive Saturnian and Jovian fleets finally clash, their torpedoes and kinetic rounds enter this null zone, suffer terminal coordinate collapse, and literally just drift away harmlessly. Xylos disarmed 2 entire armadas without firing a single shot. So I want to leave you with this provocative final thought. If the ultimate assertion of sovereignty isn't achieved by building superior weapons, but by rewriting the gravitational rules of the battlefield itself, what unseen systems of leverage are currently steering our own world? Next time you see a sudden burst of chaos on the news, or a weird, inexplicable shift in the financial markets, ask yourself, is this the actual event? Or is it just the noisy distraction designed to hide the quiet architectures being built right underneath us? Thanks for diving into the archives with me today. I'll see you in the next explainer.